The 7 oddest pieces of advice you receive after 75. Turning 75 and suddenly everyone's an expert on your life? It's almost like a switch flips. You've lived through decades of change, built wisdom the hard way, and earned every gray hair. Yet somehow, that's the moment people start telling you how to live. Advice comes from all directions. What to eat, how to spend your money, how careful you should be, what you should stop doing, and even which lotions or pills are suddenly essential. If you're over 75, or you spend time with someone who is, you've definitely witnessed this flood of unsolicited guidance. Some of it is well-meaning, some of it is downright strange, and a lot of it contradicts itself. Today, we're taking a closer look at the 7 oddest pieces of advice people are constantly given after 75. Wisdom so questionable it might make you wonder if everyone else has lost their minds, and why most of it probably deserves to be ignored. One of the first things people start telling you after 75 is that it is time to slow down. Not gently suggesting rest when you need it, but slowing down as a rule, as if life now comes with a universal speed limit. This advice often arrives without anyone asking how you actually feel, what your energy is like, or what brings you joy. It is said casually, sometimes kindly, but it carries the idea that movement itself has an expiration date. The strange part is that it ignores something very basic. Slowing down should be a choice, not an obligation imposed by a number. Plenty of people in their late 70s and beyond are active, curious, and engaged, not because they are trying to prove something, but because staying involved makes them feel alive. When others insist you should slow down, they are often projecting their own fears about aging, imagining weakness where there may be strength. The more honest approach would be to listen to your body and your mind, adjusting when needed, but never apologizing for momentum. Life does not suddenly stop asking for participation just because the calendar says so. Closely tied to that is another piece of advice that sounds practical on the surface but becomes odd the longer you think about it. Do not spend your money, save it. This one usually comes from a place of concern, yet it rarely comes with any clear explanation of what exactly you are saving for. You have already navigated decades of financial responsibility, paid bills, weathered uncertainty, and learned the value of money the hard way. And yet, after 75, there is an unspoken suggestion that enjoyment should be postponed indefinitely. The contradiction is hard to miss. People will tell you to be careful, to hold back, to avoid unnecessary spending, and then in the same breath encourage you to enjoy life while you still can. Those two ideas cannot coexist without tension. Saving for security makes sense, but saving at the cost of living does not. Money at this stage is not just a safety net. It is also a tool for comfort, experience, and pleasure. Using it thoughtfully to make life richer is not reckless. In many ways, it is the very point of having saved at all. Then there is the advice that cuts a little deeper, often said casually but carrying heavy weight, that you are too old to learn something new. This one tends to show up when technology enters the room, or when curiosity leads you somewhere unexpected. It might be about learning to use a new device, picking up a hobby, or even changing a routine that has been in place for years. The assumption behind it is that learning belongs to the young, that flexibility belongs to earlier chapters of life. Yet history, science, and lived experience all say otherwise. The human brain remains capable of growth, adaptation, and creativity well into later years. Learning does not suddenly become pointless or impossible at 75. In fact, learning often becomes more meaningful because it is driven by interest rather than obligation. When someone suggests you are too old to learn, what they are really saying is that they do not want to take the time to explain, or they cannot imagine themselves doing the same. Curiosity does not have an age limit, and the desire to understand the world does not fade on a schedule. As these pieces of advice pile up, a pattern begins to emerge. Much of what people say after 75 is less about you and more about their discomfort with aging itself. They speak as if life narrows naturally with age, as if options quietly disappear, and as if wanting more is somehow unreasonable. This mindset shows up again when people start suggesting you should downsize, move to a smaller place, simplify your surroundings. Sometimes this advice is practical and welcome, especially if maintaining a large home becomes burdensome. But often it is offered without context, as if smaller automatically means better, safer, or more appropriate. What gets overlooked is that a home is not just a structure. It is memory, familiarity, and identity. It holds routines that ground you and spaces that feel like yourself. Letting go of that should be a personal decision, made on your own timeline, for your own reasons. Being older does not mean you need to shrink your life to fit someone else's idea of what is manageable. All of this advice, from slowing down to saving money to giving up on learning or space, shares a common thread. It assumes decline as the default. It frames aging as a process of subtraction rather than transformation. And that framing is what makes the advice feel so strange, so disconnected from reality. Aging does change things, without question. Bodies need more care, energy fluctuates, priorities shift. But change does not automatically mean less value, less agency, or less purpose. The oddest part of the advice given after 75 is not that people offer guidance, but that so much of it quietly suggests your best thinking is behind you. What rarely gets said is that by this point, you have earned a deep understanding of yourself. You know what tires you and what fuels you. You know which risks are worth taking and which are not. You have lived through trends, fears, predictions, and warnings that never came true. That perspective is not something to override with generic advice. It is something to trust. The truth is, after 75, advice should sound different. It should be less about limitation and more about alignment. Less about what you should stop doing and more about what still matters to you. As the noise of opinions grows louder, the challenge becomes learning which voices to listen to and which to let pass by. Not every suggestion needs to be argued with, and not every comment needs a response. Sometimes the most powerful choice is quiet discernment, recognizing that well-meaning advice is not always well-suited advice. Life after 75 is not a waiting room. It is still life, unfolding day by day, shaped by choices, preferences, and desires that remain valid. And while the advice may keep coming, your authority over your own life does not expire. As you move further into this stage of life, the advice does not slow down. It simply changes its tone. It becomes more personal, more insistent, often delivered with a smile that suggests concern but carries a quiet judgment underneath. Suddenly, people start paying close attention to what you eat. A small indulgence becomes a topic of discussion. Someone notices a dessert on your plate or a bit of salt in your food, and before you know it, you are receiving a lecture about what is good or bad for you. The strange part is not that health matters, because of course it does. The strange part is how quickly joy gets removed from the equation. Food stops being nourishment and pleasure combined and becomes something to monitor, restrict, and fear. What gets lost in these conversations is the understanding that quality of life matters just as much as longevity. A life extended without enjoyment is not necessarily a better one. Balance matters, listening to your body matters, but so does allowing yourself small pleasures without guilt. After 75, you have likely earned the right to decide that for yourself. Alongside the food advice comes another familiar refrain: you should rest more. On the surface, it sounds kind and sensible. Rest is important, recovery matters, and pushing too hard helps no one. But when rest becomes the default recommendation for everything, it starts to feel less like care and more like confinement. There is a subtle message hidden in it, the idea that activity is now risky, that effort should be avoided, that stillness is safer than movement. Yet countless people find that staying active, in ways that suit them, keeps both the body and the mind engaged. Movement does not have to mean strain or exhaustion. It can mean walking, gardening, dancing in the kitchen, meeting friends, or simply having a reason to get up and go somewhere. Rest should be something you choose when you need it, not something prescribed as a permanent state. Life does not become healthier by shrinking it down to the smallest possible version. Then there is perhaps one of the most unsettling pieces of advice of all, often delivered as encouragement but landing as dismissal. You should just be grateful you are still here. Gratitude is a beautiful thing, and many people feel it deeply as they grow older. But when gratitude is used to silence desire, it becomes a problem. The message behind it is that wanting more, planning ahead, or dreaming at this age is somehow unreasonable. As if simply existing should be enough, and anything beyond that is asking too much. This advice ignores a fundamental truth. Being alive is not the same as fully living. Gratitude and ambition are not opposites. You can appreciate the life you have and still want to shape it in meaningful ways. You can be thankful for today while caring deeply about tomorrow. The idea that age should shrink your inner world is one of the most damaging myths we quietly accept. When you step back and look at all these odd pieces of advice together, a clearer picture emerges. After 75, people often stop seeing you as an individual and start seeing you as an age. Your preferences, your history, your personality get blurred into a category filled with assumptions. Advice becomes standardized, as if everyone over a certain number shares the same needs, fears, and limitations. That is why so much of it feels disconnected from reality. Real aging is not a single experience. It is as varied as the people living it. Some days you may want quiet and rest. Other days you may crave stimulation, challenge, or connection. Both are valid, and neither requires permission. What makes this stage of life unique is not that you need more guidance, but that you have more perspective. You have seen how often certainty turns out to be wrong. You have watched confident predictions fall apart. You have learned that life rarely follows a straight line, no matter how carefully people plan. That experience gives you a kind of wisdom that cannot be taught, only lived. And yet, ironically, it is often at this stage that others try to take the steering wheel. They mean well, but good intentions do not automatically lead to good advice. The most useful guidance after 75 tends to be quiet and respectful. It asks questions instead of giving instructions. It supports choices instead of replacing them. It recognizes that independence does not disappear with age, it simply changes shape. Needing help in some areas does not cancel out competence in others. Accepting support does not mean surrendering control. These distinctions matter, and they often get lost when advice is given too quickly. There is also a deeper emotional layer beneath much of the advice older people receive. For many, watching someone age triggers anxiety about their own future. It reminds them of fragility, of time passing, of things they cannot control. Offering advice becomes a way to manage that discomfort. If they can tell you how to live, maybe aging feels less unpredictable. Understanding this does not make the advice less irritating, but it can make it easier to see where it comes from. Sometimes the oddest advice is less about correcting your behavior and more about soothing someone else's fear. That understanding gives you a choice. You can take what is useful and let the rest go without resentment. You can nod politely and continue living in a way that feels right to you. You can listen without absorbing, consider without obeying. After all, you have already lived long enough to know that advice is not a command. It is information filtered through someone else's experience, biases, and limitations. The truth is, after 75, the rules change in an important way. You no longer need to prove anything. You do not need to justify your pace, your interests, or your priorities. You are allowed to contradict expectations. You are allowed to rest when you want and move when you want. You are allowed to save and spend, to learn and to repeat, to plan and to live in the moment. None of that requires approval. Perhaps the most honest piece of advice for this stage of life is rarely spoken out loud. Trust yourself. Trust the knowledge you have earned through living. Pay attention to your body, but also to your spirit. Listen to doctors, but also to your own instincts. Accept help when it truly helps, and gently decline it when it does not. Growing older does not mean handing over the authority of your life. It means using it more carefully, more intentionally, and more kindly toward yourself. In the end, the odd advice will keep coming. It always does. But it does not get to define your story. That remains yours, shaped not by assumptions or expectations, but by the quiet, everyday choices you continue to make. Age may change the landscape, but it does not erase your voice. And as long as you are here, that voice still matters.